St. Louis's Boeing prepares for a strike after thousands of union workers rejected a contract offer.
The union hall this morning for the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, District 837. Union officials here saying their members overwhelmingly rejected a contract offer from Boeing.
Today, $2 billion in new military assistance for Ukraine. $800 million of this will help strengthen Ukraine's arsenal for the most urgently needed defense equipment.
Prime Minister Mark Carney ordered a review of Canada's contract to buy 88 F-35 fighter jets, says he looks to build new security relationships that are outside of our relationship with the U.S.
A massive shift is rocking America's defense community. Something unexpected is happening to one of the country's key industries, and our closest ally is behind it. We will reveal what exactly is going on later in this video. For now, picture the shockwaves. One of America's best-known manufacturers is being sidelined in a vital defense contract. Something big is happening beyond the headlines, and it's about to get even bigger. We have a hint for you. A multi-billion-dollar fighter jet deal, long assumed destined for U.S. companies, is suddenly heading in a new direction. Why would a close ally do this? Stay with us. We'll explain what led to this turn of events and what it means for workers, taxpayers, and international security. The story is only beginning to unfold, and it promises to be a game share. Before we begin, make sure to hit the like button. It helps us beat the YouTube algorithm. In Ottawa, the news hit like a thunderclap. Canadian officials announced a contract worth billions of dollars for next-generation fighter jets, and they awarded it to a coalition of overseas manufacturers. This marked the first time in decades that a Canadian defense project of this scale would completely shut out U.S. firms. These deals had long been expected to go to American companies in Missouri, Texas, and Washington state. But instead, Canadian pilots will soon be flying aircraft assembled in Montreal with engines and critical components coming from Europe and beyond. U.S. officials in Washington say Ottawa's decision appears to be a response to recent trade disputes and high U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and aircraft parts. By choosing this path, Canada sent a clear signal that it wants more secure suppliers beyond the reach of unpredictable trade policy. In practical terms, it means factories in places like Seattle and Fort Worth, home to major U.S. aircraft builders, may now be left waiting as the expected orders go elsewhere. Before we continue, make sure to hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Across the United States, the impact was immediate and severe. In Fort Worth, Texas, where thousands of workers at a Lockheed Martin fighter jet plant suddenly saw their orders vanish. Employees gathered outside the factory gates in shock. Union leaders warned that layoffs were inevitable, and many workers felt betrayed by an ally they had supported for decades. The mood was similarly grim in St. Louis, Missouri, where Boeing's defense division anchors the local economy. Suppliers ranging from aluminum plants in the Midwest to avionics firms in California suddenly faced uncertainty as the anticipated Canadian demand evaporated. Economists warn that more than 20,000 American jobs could be at risk if this trend continues, and many smaller subcontractors could suffer severe damage. This is not just about corporations. It's communities feeling the strain. In towns across aerospace country, people face a sobering realization. The very tariffs and trade fights meant to protect American jobs may have ended up hurting their own towns first. The shock reaches beyond the economics. Fighter jets have long been a symbol of American military and industrial power. Models like the F-16, the F-A-18, and the F-35 have formed the backbone of Western air forces for years. To see Canada, one of the United States' closest allies, choose something different is a blow to U.S. prestige. It challenges the assumption that America will automatically be the supplier of choice for advanced defense equipment. Pentagon officials admit they were caught flat-footed. They had expected routine negotiations, not an outright rejection. For years, U.S. defense planners assumed American aircraft would dominate Allied air wings. Now those assumptions are in doubt. Observers in Europe and Asia have taken notice, and some analysts say the era of guaranteed sales may be ending. In short, Washington can no longer assume it will be the default source of cutting-edge arms for its allies. The fallout quickly became political as well. Lawmakers from states heavily invested in aerospace, including Texas, Missouri, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, immediately demanded answers from the administration. These regions rely on defense jobs and tax revenue from those factories, and leaders fear the impact on their communities. In Washington, questions flew. How could a close ally suddenly cut ties on a major defense purchase? Why was the government caught off guard? Meanwhile, in cities like Fort Worth and St. Louis, local officials warned that layoffs and revenue shortfalls could shake neighborhoods built around those factories. Mayors and governors pleaded for reassurances, and even small-town school districts began bracing for shrinking tax bases. For many Americans, it became a sobering realization that trade conflicts meant to protect jobs might have backfired. Analysts warned that this is about more than just one contract. The U.S. aerospace industry is one of the few sectors that consistently runs a trade surplus. It exports more than it imports. Each lost deal chips away at that advantage. If other countries follow Canada's lead, the effect could snowball. Nations like Poland, Australia, and Japan, all eyeing new fighter programs, may now be tempted to consider European or Asian designs if they see Canada getting better deals. That would mean even more orders moving overseas and thousands more defense jobs at risk. It would also drive costs up at home. With fewer big contracts, American firms would face higher costs per plane. In that case, U.S. taxpayers would end up paying more for fewer jets while allies flying cheaper alternatives could save money. Taxpayers will ultimately shoulder those higher costs while U.S. firms lose ground to foreign rivals. For many Americans, this development feels like more than lost jobs. It is a blow to a national narrative. U.S. aerospace achievements have been a source of pride for generations. From the Wright brothers' first flights to today's advanced fighter jets, American leaders long touted the defense industry as the envy of the world. Now Canada's choice to look elsewhere undercuts that story. Some are beginning to wonder whether the very trade policies meant to protect U.S. industry might have backfired by alienating customers. For workers who built those jets, the new reality is unsettling. Losing this contract is a sign of lost trust. If a neighbor like Canada can walk away, other allies will ask why they shouldn't do the same. It's a sobering moment for a nation used to believing its technological edge was unassailable. Inside Washington, frustration has been growing. Months ago, some Pentagon officials cautioned that aggressive tariffs could alienate allies and drive them toward competitors. Those warnings were largely set aside amid the headlines. Now, with the Canadian deal done, those leaders feel vindicated. One defense analyst summed it up well. This is not just about losing business. It's about losing trust. And it's not just the Pentagon feeling the pain. It's families across the country. In towns from Texas to Seattle, the effects are becoming personal. It's the diner waitress in Missouri pouring coffee for laid-off machinists, or the school teacher in Texas worrying about a shrinking tax base. For many, it feels like the trade war has already claimed its first casualties at home. Economists point out that Canada's decision reaches far beyond any one procurement. Aerospace is a strategic industry intertwining sovereignty, security, and economy. By awarding its fighter contract to 4 manufacturers, Canada is signaling that it will no longer rely solely on American politics for its military needs. In effect, even borders and treaty obligations are not enough to guarantee purchases. That message will be heard around the world from Berlin to Tokyo. Allies across Europe and in Asia will ask themselves, if one trusted partner can diversify, maybe we should too. It's a clear warning that global defense markets are becoming more multipolar, and that Washington's influence will have to be earned rather than assumed. The economic ripple extends deep into supply chains and commodity markets. A fighter jet is assembled from parts and materials sourced worldwide. Titanium from Canada or Australia, aluminum from the U.S. heartland, advanced electronics from East Asia. If Canada's orders move overseas, so will much of the demand for those inputs. Mines and factories in places like Australia, China, Japan, and Scandinavia could see new business while American suppliers risk seeing orders dry up. For example, rare earth minerals used in avionics and ceramics could be sourced abroad instead of from U.S. partners. Companies that had expanded their mills or factories to meet expected Canadian demand now face uncertainty. Even a small change in demand can cascade. A U.S. forging plant or electronics shop that once built parts for those jets might have to cut back. Over time, new plants and mines could open overseas instead of here, permanently altering where crucial defense components are made. In short, even raw material markets are part of this high-stakes battlefield, and the effects will compound over years. In Asia, America's defense partners are also taking note. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia have long built their air forces around U.S. aircraft, but Canada's move shows alternatives can work. European fighters like the Eurofighter or Sweden's Grin were once seen mainly as backup options. If Canada can integrate those jets successfully, Asian allies might feel justified in exploring alternatives. Some of those nations have even started joint development projects of their own. They will watch closely to see if Canada's gamble pays off. In practical terms, this matters because coalition operations depend on interoperability. If more allies field mixed fleets of American and non-American jets, joint training and logistics become more complex. U.S. planners worry that a growing number of different platforms would create friction, potentially blunting the effectiveness of combined forces. The financial costs are significant as well. Analysts estimate that Canada's shift could translate into tens of billions of dollars in lost revenue for U.S. defense firms over the next decade. Those orders are not just profit today. They fund tomorrow's technology. In aerospace, big contracts from allies underwrite research on new engines, stealth features, and advanced avionics. Without those contracts, American companies may have to cut back or postpone R&D programs. Fewer export orders also mean weaker bargaining power. U.S. firms might have to accept lower profit margins or larger investments to win smaller deals. Over time, this could slow American innovation in military aviation. Meanwhile, European competitors are effectively being paid to advance their designs, gradually closing the technology gap that once separated them from the United States. Politically, Canada's move has flipped the usual narrative. Instead of Washington claiming victory for American jobs, Ottawa is openly touting a win for its own industry and for taking a stand on trade. This sets a new precedent. Other countries will notice that a NATO member just used defense procurement as leverage in a trade dispute and succeeded. It shows that U.S. allies might be willing to do the same if it suits their interests. In effect, it means Washington can no longer count on automatic loyalty. Future defense deals will be negotiated on performance, price, and policy alignment, not just on historical ties. The U.S. defense lobby used to enjoy unquestioned influence, but now that influence looks conditional. There's also a broader economic risk. Defense exports have helped America run a trade surplus in a world where most sectors import more than they export. Losing even part of that advantage weakens the U.S. trade balance and could pressure the dollar. More importantly, it means less revenue flowing into the economy. Export dollars have helped fund America's global military commitments, research budgets, bases overseas, and so on. In effect, fewer exports translate to less financial leeway for power projection. Think of it this way. Losing export contracts is like quietly removing a pillar of support from the structure that underpins America's defense spending. In practical terms, it could lead to tighter budgets at home or less money for overseas operations in the future. Strategically, the U.S. finds itself at a crossroads. Pentagon planners have long built their strategies around the assumption that allies will fly American systems to guarantee interoperability. Canada's decision forces them to rethink parts of that plan. Coalition operations have always managed some degree of mixed equipment, but a bigger shift could complicate mission planning, supply chains, and joint exercises. Every time an allied fleet adds a new foreign type of jet, the U.S. has to allocate extra training, spare parts, and command support. Over years, that can create friction that planners have to manage. The U.S. doctrine of one fleet, one fight is being tested by this development. Domestically, the political fallout is mounting. Legislators from Texas, Missouri, Washington State, and other aerospace-heavy states are sounding the alarm. They point out that once defense contracts go overseas, the factories here can face permanent downsizing. And it's not easy to rebuild an aerospace workforce. Tens of thousands of skilled machinists, engineers, and technicians have developed expertise over years of building fighters. If those jobs disappear, the knowledge goes with them. Congress members are already pressing the Pentagon and the White House for solutions, warning that every contract lost chips away at America's industrial base. The message is clear. The industrial heartland of the nation could erode if this trend continues. Crucially, this is not just a temporary standoff to be fixed by a single phone call. This episode reflects a deeper calculation by allies who feel they need to protect their own interests in an era of trade conflict. If Washington does not change its broader approach, for example, by easing tariffs or providing clearer assurances, other countries may quietly prepare their own contingency plans. A NATO partner has just shown that it's willing to break with tradition over a minor trade dispute. That fact will not be forgotten. Some analysts even call this the start of a more multipolar defense economy. Instead of a single dominant supplier and hierarchy, contracts and alliances are branching into a web. In such a world, U.S. influence depends on consistency and credibility, which have been eroded by years of trade wars and shifting rhetoric. Beyond numbers, there is a psychological shift. The United States will no longer be viewed as the automatic first choice for military aircraft. The narrative that only America has the best jets is in doubt now. Allies see that they have alternatives. This matters not only for future sales, but for the U.S. identity as the arsenal of democracy. For generations, Americans believed their factories would naturally arm not only the U.S. military, but also much of the free world. If that belief unravels, it could take a long time to restore. U.S. manufacturers may have to completely reinvent themselves as competitive global exporters rather than relying on alliance loyalty. In a decade, the industry might look very different if markets worldwide start buying more evenly from multiple suppliers. Europe is perhaps the clearest geopolitical beneficiary from this turn of events. By sending these contracts to European manufacturers, Canada has given a boost to Europe's aerospace industry. Continental NATO members may feel emboldened. For decades, Europeans often bought U.S. planes even when their own designs were available because it guaranteed interoperability and ties with Washington. Now, Canada has broken that pattern. European defense leaders will surely note that an ally has shown faith in their technology, arguing that NATO's future does not require blind reliance on American arms. Allies from Italy to Poland will watch closely. They may become more willing to back European programs like the Franco-German fighter. In effect, Ottawa has shifted the terms of alliance debate, subtly strengthening Europe's hand in future procurement and strategy. In Asia, the message will not go unnoticed either. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia will see that if Canada, a close partner with shared values, can pivot to non-U.S. jets, then they might feel safer keeping their options open as well. Some of these nations have already been developing joint fighter programs with multiple partners. They will now watch carefully to see if Canada's decision pays off. They know that relying on one source is now seen as a potential liability. Over time, U.S. planners worry that more allies quietly hedging with mixed fleets could complicate coalition operations in any future conflict. What comes next depends on Washington's response. The administration faces a stark choice: pivot back to allies or double down on confrontation. The U.S. still leads in jet technology, stealth, avionics, and engines remain world-class. But that advantage will not matter if potential customers refuse to buy. If the White House rolls back tariffs, rebuilds trust, and offers more predictable terms, it may slow this trend. But if it continues aggressive policies, other countries will feel vindicated in looking elsewhere. The contracts Canada has signed will be delivered over the coming years. But whether this moment becomes a brief bump or the start of a structural decline will be determined by U.S. policies. Remember to hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. And your support means